Coming up today, the government unveils its three-track approach to restructure a number of massive debt-ridden firms that have struggled to move with the times. President Park Geun-hye plans to check the pulse of national sentiment when she meets with the chief news editors of major media outlets at the presidential office. First, could North Korea's recent submarine-launched ballistic missile test have been a success after all? A North Korea expert says it might have gone exactly as Pyongyang had planned. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Tuesday, the 26th of April. You're tuned into our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. We are going to begin with efforts to revamp Korea's sluggish economy. The government has announced a comprehensive restructuring plan for sectors that have lost steam, such as the shipbuilding, shipping and steel industries. Our Kim Min-ji starts us off.
The Financial Services Commission says it will take a three-tiered approach to restructuring Korea's traditional core industries.
Business conditions are deteriorating structurally for industries such as shipbuilding, shipping and steel, and the situation is not likely to clear up soon. We have been tasked with rooting out companies or industries that are doing poorly or supporting them to ensure they remain competitive.
The first tier will cover industries that are highly sensitive to the current economic conditions. A government consultative body will set the basic direction of the restructuring plan, which will be carried out by the individual firms and their creditors. The second tier will involve restructuring companies based on their estimated credit risk in order to either normalize their business or liquidate their assets in case of insolvency. The third tier involves restructuring companies or industries suffering from oversupply. Here, the companies will draw up their own restructuring plans, possibly involving mergers with other firms or downsizing their facilities, and the government will support them. Amid a prolonged global slowdown of falling oil prices, Korea's shipbuilding giants have been hit hard, with eye-watering losses on the back of cancelled orders and construction delays. Last year, the country's three major shipbuilders posted a combined loss of roughly $7 billion, forcing them to lay off workers. The shipping industry is in a similar situation, with the debt of the sector's biggest player, Hanjin Shipping, estimated at nearly $5 billion. The Financial Services Commission chairman said that for the restructuring plans to be successful, the investors, creditors, and employees must all share the burden. He vowed to expand the assets of state-run banks as well as come up with measures to support workers who have been laid off. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, staying with economic news, and Korea's growth rate has remained in the 0% range for a second straight quarter. The slowing growth, prompted by sluggish demand at home and abroad, is deepening concerns of low growth becoming a long-term trend. Hwang Jie reports.
The Korean economy slowed for another quarter. The Bank of Korea says the economy grew just 0.4% in the first quarter of this year from the previous one. This marks a slowdown from the 0.7% growth posted a quarter before and is equal to the pace of expansion posted in the second quarter of last year when the country was hit hard by an outbreak of MERS. Weighed down by slumping exports and feeble domestic demand, the first quarter growth figure came despite aggressive government spending.
The government front-loaded its budget in the first quarter, which pulled up investments in social overhead capital. The government's spending and investments contributed greatly to first quarter growth.
With that, construction investment went up almost 6% in the first quarter, while facilities investment plunged by about the same amount. Exports that have been on a downslide for over a year now dropped 1.7%, and private consumption dipped 0.3%. Citing the sluggish first quarter figures, Korea's central bank has trimmed its latest forecast for the economy to below 3%. This has further stoked worries of Korea falling into a low-growth trap, a reason why some analysts see more monetary easing down the road. But as the central bank has said the economy will show signs of a gradual recovery this quarter, economists say more figures need to be monitored. And facing skepticism that a rate cut will not be a cure-all for conditions that mostly stem from structural issues, experts say the Bank of Korea will remain cautious about moving the rate that already sits at a record low 1.5%. 황지혜, Arirang News.
Now, there have been conflicting reports about the success or otherwise of North Korea's test firing of a submarine-launched ballistic missile last weekend. However, a reliable source on North Korea says it could have gone exactly as Pyongyang had hoped. Kim Mo-gyun reports.
An expert on the North's missile program said in an article carried by 38 North, a U.S.-based North Korea monitoring website, that Pyongyang's short-lived launch of a submarine-launched ballistic missile does not necessarily signal a failure. North Korea conducted the missile test on Saturday evening. It claimed the test was successful, but many experts label it a failure since it only flew about 30 kilometers before splashing into the East Sea. However, John Silling's article said the missile could have been carrying fuel only for that distance, and he noted that it accelerated well past the speed of sound. The expert also said the test reveals that North Korea has shifted to developing a solid fuel missile after experiencing repeated failures with liquid fuel engines. According to him, images the North released of last year's SLBM test showed a yellow-orange streak of fire from the missile's tail, which is a key sign the missile runs on liquid fuel. But images of the latest test show, quote, an almost incandescent white plume, suggesting they are now using solid fuel. He said the solid fuel design is still in the earnest stages of testing, but it could make the development process easier, and he warned that North Korea's SLBMs could pose a real threat to the U.S. and its allies by 2020. The Pentagon's press secretary says the U.S. government is still assessing the latest test. He expressed regret about North Korea's latest provocation, saying that it merely serves to destabilize the Korean peninsula. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
The United Nations has called on North Korea to abide by Security Council resolutions banning the North from testing ballistic missile technology, responding to a question about Pyongyang's test fire of that submarine-launched ballistic missile over the weekend. The spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General said the regime needs to stop all provocations. The spokesperson also touched on the North Korean foreign minister's proposal to stop its nuclear tests if the US were to halt its annual military drills with South Korea. The United States dismissed the North's proposal and the South called it absurd. Now, North Korea is cracking down extra hard on people attempting to flee the country in search of a better life. A new human rights report says those caught taking the ultimate chance for freedom are often thrown into a life of squalor and back-breaking labor. Connie Kim reports.
North Koreans caught defecting are often sent to prison camps located in Gyecheon시 or Hwaryong시. The camps are notorious for their awful working and living conditions, as prisoners have to live behind a 3-meter-high fence and are categorized according to their health and workload. North Koreans caught defecting twice are usually sent straight to the prison camps, no questions asked. But this year's white paper on human rights in North Korea, published by the Seoul-based Korea Institute of National Unification, says punishment for those attempting to flee has intensified. Those caught defecting even once are immediately sent to the camps. And some 180 testimonies describe the harsh reality the prisoners face. One defector testified of an incident where a female prisoner was brutally beaten for dancing. Another defector said prisoners were beaten up if they didn't fulfill their daily quota of work. The human rights of North Koreans working abroad are also under the microscope. North Koreans working in the Middle East, China, and Russia are usually not treated or paid fairly, a factor that contributed to the mass defection this month of a group of North Korean restaurant workers to the south. Pyongyang's control over its people is now at the scope where North Koreans have to pay about $1,000, a fortune for most people in the north, just to be sent abroad to work. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The U.S. House Armed Services Committee has called for better cooperation in the security sector with South Korea and Japan. Its 2017 draft defense budget bill, released on Monday local time, calls for the U.S. to continue to support trilateral cooperation as well as bilateral defense cooperation between the two Asian countries regarding security challenges in the Asia-Pacific region. It also highlights the importance of providing adequate training and deployment of the missile defense system known as Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, to South Korea amid increasing regional threats. Washington has long pursued greater defense cooperation with Seoul and Tokyo as it seeks to increase its influence in the region under the Obama administration's Pivot to Asia policy, aimed partly at containing China's growing power in the area. Now, in a bid to hear from the press about public opinion, President Park Geun-hye has invited the chief news editors of major media outlets to the presidential office for lunch. This applies to 46 domestic outlets with permanent correspondents at the presidential office of Cheongwade, and that includes Arirang TV. During today's 90-minute round table, which is happening as we speak, the news chiefs will be free to ask the president questions. Issues will likely range from North Korea's provocations and nuclear issues to the shift in the domestic political landscape following this month's general election, which saw the ruling Saenuri Party lose its majority in the National Assembly. We'll have more updates during our next newscast at 3 p.m. Korea time. Now, in domestic politics, the three major political parties are busy sorting out their internal affairs. During a meeting Tuesday, leaders of the ruling Saenuri Party apologized for the defeat in the recent general election. Floor leader Won Yu-chol said the party will take care of the people's livelihoods by uniting the party. Over at the main opposition Minju Party of Korea, it looks like the race for key positions is really starting to heat up now. The party will elect a new floor leader and vice floor leader in May, and the competition is likely to be between incumbent lawmakers and newly elected representatives. The minor opposition People's Party is also holding a meeting today with the 38 lawmakers elected earlier this month. They are expected to solidify the party's vision for a new type of politics and discuss reforming the party structure and electing parliamentary leaders. Now, after solid wins in New York last week, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are expected to rack up even more delegates this week. The two frontrunners have significant leads in a number of recent polls across the 5 eastern states that will be voting on Tuesday. Oh Soo-young reports.
Ahead of Tuesday's primaries, when 5 eastern states will go to the polls, it looks like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are once again the favourites to win, with both holding double-digit leads in polls across most states. For the Democrats, Pennsylvania is the biggest prize, with 210 delegates up for grabs. Recent polls show that Clinton is around 15 percentage points ahead of her rival Bernie Sanders in the state. The former Secretary of State also has strong leads in Delaware, Rhode Island and Maryland, although the margins are tighter in Connecticut. According to the Associated Press, there are 384 delegates at stake on the Democratic side in all 5 states that are voting on Tuesday. Clinton has amassed 1,944 delegates so far, to Sanders' 1,192. That means she has to win 28% of the delegates in the remaining contests to hit the magic number of 2,383 needed to clinch the nomination. Sanders would need 73% to win the nomination, a task that's looking more like an uphill climb. Over on the Republican side, Donald Trump is leading by double digits in all 5 states, where there are 172 delegates up for grabs. Pennsylvania is also the biggest prize for the Republicans, and Trump's support among likely voters is roughly 45%, far ahead of Ted Cruz's 27% and John Kasich's 20%. The GOP frontrunner is heading into Tuesday's contest with 845 delegates, 392 shy of the 1,237 needed to win the nomination outright. That's far more than his rivals, who are nowhere near the total and have reportedly teamed up to block him in order to force a contested convention in which no candidate has a majority. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, staying with international news, and the World Health Organization is warning of the potential for a marked increase in Zika infections and the spread of the virus to new parts of the world. The UN Health Agency says that as the seasonal temperatures begin to rise in Europe, the 2 species of mosquito that transmit the virus will begin to circulate there. There is some good news, though, as the WHO said the Zika outbreak in hardest hit Brazil was clearly on the decline, but it did not provide any numbers to back that up. Recent scientific consensus is that Zika causes microcephaly, a form of severe brain damage in newborn babies. The WHO says developers around the world are working on 23 vaccine development projects, but the agency warned it could take years. The number of Koreans suffering from depression has risen sharply over the past 5 years, especially in men. According to the National Health Insurance Service, almost 600,000 Koreans visited hospitals to receive treatment for depression in 2015. That's up 16% from 517,000 patients in 2010. Of this figure, the number of men in their 20s and 80s and older rose by 40% and 96% respectively. The steep rise in the number of young male patients is attributed to the pressures of finding a job in the current economic climate and anxiety over marriage. Experts say there's greater awareness about depression, and Korean men are becoming more willing to seek out help from health professionals. And on that note, that's where we're going to leave it on this Tuesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as ever for watching, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. So until then, goodbye.